In a small church within a monastery in France lies what art historians consider the most brutal painting of Christ ever made. Although it was created during the height of the Renaissance, you won't see a glorious or idealized Christ here. This is not the kind of image we're used to finding hanging inside churches. What you're about to see is a devastated body, covered in sores, fingers twisted in agony, the skin green and decomposing, as if the cross were not a symbol of redemption, but of disease, torture, and slow death. Today we're going to talk about the Isenheim Altarpiece, a painting so haunting that even many believers prefer not to look at it at all. Yet at the same time, it remains one of the most honest, raw, and profoundly human works of art ever created. And not just because of what it shows, but how it shows it. An immense wooden structure made of panels that open and close like the doors of an altar, and each time they open, something even more disturbing is revealed. The artist behind it is almost unknown. We still debate his name, and the intention behind this work continues to puzzle us. Why would someone paint such a horrifying scene and hang it in the most sacred place imaginable? The first thing to understand is that this painting was never meant to hang in a church to begin with. The altarpiece was created between 1512 and 1516 for an Antonite monastery in Isenheim, France, which specialized in treating Saint Anthony's fire, a disease that modern science now knows as ergotism, caused by eating rye bread contaminated with a parasitic fungus. This explains the horrifying appearance of Christ's flesh in the painting. The artist did not imagine Christ this way, rather he portrayed the very symptoms that the monks were trying to alleviate. The monks knew that the sick would see themselves in these images, that by looking at the wounds of Jesus, identical to their own, they would feel that Christ suffered with them, that they were not alone, that even in their most unbearable pain, someone, the holiest of all, understood them. When we first look at this painting, we are confronted with death stripped of disguise, grotesque and terrifying. The wooden cross on which the body hangs has a striking three-dimensional quality, almost like a trompe-l'oeil. Look at the wood, rough, cheap, ugly beams, crudely assembled, as if the artist had asked a carpenter to build a model. From this three-dimensional cross, the dying body protrudes outward. His green fingers twist into claw-like shapes, turning Christ into a frightening figure, a dying man clinging to us, desperately reaching for help that never comes. Here, Christ dies in a dreadful place, barren and empty, with low distant hills and a light without light, a depressing, joyless darkness. His greyish-yellow, decaying flesh is covered in red sores, and in the lower panel, the green corpse of Christ is pierced and oozing bodily fluids. It is a horrifying image. On either side, the panels show two key figures. On the left, Saint Sebastian, pierced by arrows, the patron saint against the plague, and on the right, Saint Anthony Abbot, protector against Saint Anthony's fire, calm as a demon tries to tempt him. In modern Western terms, art has become inseparable from the idea of self-expression. Artists create art to tell us what they think and believe, but religious art commissioned for churches and monasteries in the Middle Ages had no such purpose. As I have said many times before, it served a social function. Art was meant to teach religious stories to the poor and illiterate. It was the book of those who could not read. So far, I've only described how the altarpiece looks when it is completely closed, but the Isenheim Altarpiece was conceived as a monumental structure with movable wings that could be opened and closed in different configurations, like a sacred book whose pages unfolded slowly to reveal new chapters of the Christian mystery. Today these panels are displayed separately, but originally the altarpiece functioned as a kind of visual theatre that transformed according to the liturgical calendar. On important feast days such as Christmas or Easter, the monks would open the altarpiece, and beneath that brutal crucifixion, another story appeared. Suddenly there was light, colour, hope. The first opening revealed three radiant scenes. On the left, the Annunciation, in the centre, a fusion of the angelic concert and the Nativity, and on the right, the resurrection of Christ. This resurrection is possibly the most stunning in all of European art. The resurrected Christ in this painting rises from the tomb into a night sky illuminated by an immense sun that glows around his radiant white skin. The cool halo of the solar disk, the red of Christ's stigmata, the gold of his beard, and the pale pink and magnificent blue of his robe make the colors of this painting among the brightest ever seen. But there is a third opening. When the wings of the altarpiece were fully opened, they revealed the carved interior by Nicolas de Haguenau, wooden sculptures with Saint Anthony the Abbot enthroned at the center, and two painted panels that once again plunge us into the strange and the unsettling. On the left, we see Saint Anthony visiting Saint Paul the Hermit, a quiet, almost bucolic scene with ravens bringing bread and medicinal plants growing around them. It is a pause, a moment of contemplation. But on the right, we face the temptation of Saint Anthony, the most spectacular panel of all. In it, the artist uses his chromatic genius and Gothic imagination to give life to the demons that torment Saint Anthony in the desert. The white-bearded saint is immobilized by grotesque creatures swarming all around him. They have bulging, glassy eyes. One of them even bears the same sores and gangrene that disfigure Christ. Most disturbing of all are the silhouettes on the horizon, rising from a glowing, infernal ruin. But now you might be wondering, who was the man who painted all of this? The truth is, we don't really know, not even his name. The work is attributed to an artist we now call Matthias Grunewald, who was probably actually named Matthis Gotthard Nittard. But much like his art, his identity is shrouded in mystery. The name Grunewald was mistakenly assigned to him more than a century after his death, and yet it was under that name that he became immortalized in the history of art. We know he was born around 1475 in Würzburg, that he worked as both a painter and an engineer, and that he died in 1528. But for centuries, he was almost completely forgotten. Several of his works were lost, and others were attributed to more famous artists such as Albrecht Dürer. And yet, this artist painted one of the most powerful works in the history of religious art. Artists like Otto Dix and George Grosz drew inspiration from his disfigured Christ to portray the mutilated soldiers of the First World War. Max Ernst borrowed ideas from his demons to create his own, and even Picasso paid him tribute. Grunewald was not a conventional Christian artist, nor a mere servant of religious iconography. He was, above all, a spiritual thinker, someone who dared to look directly at the darkest mysteries of his faith, suffering, disease, and death, transforming them into images that were revolting, haunting, and strangely beautiful. In doing so, he created a work that shakes your soul, even if you believe in nothing. Today, the Isenheim Altarpiece is recognized as a masterpiece of European art, but it would probably be even more famous if we knew more about its creator. People love the stories behind the genius: Michelangelo and his battle with the Sistine Chapel ceiling, Van Gogh and his ear, Caravaggio and his turbulent life. But in Grunewald's case, there are no grand anecdotes, no diaries, no letters, only a doubtful identity and a scarce biography that speaks of an era at the end of the Middle Ages when artists were still craftsmen rather than celebrities. After everything we've seen, I'm left with one question. Is it the unknown identity of this artist that has kept a work like this from receiving the recognition it deserves? Or is it that, deep down, the Christian community doesn't feel entirely comfortable facing such a harrowing image? Because let's be honest, there is something profoundly unsettling about staring directly at the decomposition of Christ's body, at seeing his figure twist in pain from the nails. For many, it's easier to hold on to the message of redemption than to think about the sheer brutality of his physical suffering. But I'd love to know what you think. Let me know in the comments. Thank you so much for watching this video, and if you'd like to support this project, you can now find fragments of this altarpiece available for your collection. On our website, you will also find more than 700 historical artworks to explore and choose from to hang in your home. Worldwide shipping is free. I've left the link in the description so you can place your order. Thanks again for your support, and I'll see you in the next video.